you've got two really conflicting styles of teams going on here, Mason. You've got the defense of South Carolina, and you've got the offense of LSU. And specifically, the matchup that everybody in the nation has been talking about has been this South Carolina defensive front and how they will play this week versus what a lot of people have talked about and think about the LSU offensive line as one of the best in the country. So that's one of the very first matchups that I want to talk about today. And I'd love to hear what you've got to say about this. But we did not do a deep dive in the preseason. We did about 35 deep dives on different teams throughout the country, teams that we felt like had the best opportunity to affect the college football playoff. We said it over and over on all 35 of those videos. South Carolina was not one of those teams. So going into this week, we were a little more, I guess, a little less aware of what South Carolina had going on, say, than LSU. So we had to kind of go and do our research this week, dig into South Carolina a little bit. And here are some of the notes that we had kind of come up with. But Dylan Stewart was somebody that Mason had contacted me about last week and was like, man, look at this guy. Look, what's going on here? Who is this guy? And he's going to definitely take the nation by storm because this is a super, super talented fella. Freaky athlete. Only played a couple of games of college football, guys. But in this game, I would say that the strength right now of this LSU offense is their offensive line, and specifically the two tackles, right? Will Campbell, Emory Jones, guys that a lot of people are figuring to be first-round NFL draft picks. So with that being said, what do you think about this matchup? And, I didn't even mention the interior of the defensive line there. We can kind of get to that in a second, or you can hit it, Mason. But there's a couple of guys listed here, but the list is long. There is a lot of depth in this defensive line room. I was very, very surprised to see it whenever I went and looked at the roster. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but South Carolina hasn't exactly recruited in the top 10 every year or anything. So you just don't expect it. But the way they hit the portal, it seems like they hit it just right to add depth and a bunch of guys coming of age right at the right time. This seems like the perfect storm. And then the injection of the true freshman talent, Dylan Stewart, of course, is the cherry on top of this little banana split they got going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dylan Stewart is a freshman phenom, former 5-star guy. The recruiting industry got it right when it came to Dylan Stewart. Definitely a first-round pick. Might, by the time, which I assume he's going to go pro in 3 years at this rate, he might be the number 1 overall pick, and that would not shock me one bit. And that in a tough class, we talked about it earlier. We're going to get to a segment where we cover the top freshmen in this year so far. We were hoping to do that tonight. Not going to be able to do that, but Dylan Stewart is one of one. I mean, he's a phenomenal player on the defensive side of the football at such a premier position. I mean, as an edge rusher, to see this guy at 6'6", 245 pounds, the way he bends, I mean, he looks like he's a 6 foot, 200-pound lineman out there flying around the football, just a high motor guy, and is going to take the majority of the attention away from this South Carolina defensive front. However, he's probably not even the best guy on this defensive line right now as a true freshman. He will be, but as of right now, I got to look at the other end position and take a look at Kyle Kennard. I will learn how to say his name. I don't know if it's Kennard or Kennard, but you guys let me know in the comment section. Similar,
they will.
They will. We'll get it right eventually. Similar size, 6'5", 254. He's already notched 5 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Guys, what these two defensive ends or edge rushers, whatever you want to call them, are doing on the edge of this defensive line is nothing short of spectacular. I mean, both of them. Kyle, I'll just call him Kyle since I can't pronounce his last name right. Kyle is He's doing it. He's the leader of the unit, I would say. More experience.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting, doing some research on these teams, there are only 5 total players in college football right now that have 2 forced fumbles this season. 2 of them play for South Carolina. That's pretty. That's pretty disruptive. That's called wreaking havoc. For edge players to be forcing fumbles, they're getting to the quarterback, and that's what's so impressive about this front. But then you move into the interior, right? So everybody's going to talk about these edge players. Go into the inside of this line, and you've got number 99, big number 99, 6'4", 315 pounds, got 9 tackles already. You're not supposed to do that on the interior, because if you're a really good interior player, teams aren't running up the middle against you. Some teams are stubborn enough to do it, and but counter or on the opposite side of him, you got number 91 coming in. A big twitchy defensive tackle as well. He's got 5 tackles and a sack. Just really impressed with this defensive line, and I think that this is the matchup of the weekend of any units of any games. This is the matchup of the weekend, because opposite of South Carolina is, in my opinion, at least a top 3 offensive line in the SEC. Emory Jones, Will Campbell, their first round draft picks. Just write them in. Barring each of them giving up 2 sacks in this game or something like that. I mean, which could happen with the South Carolina defensive front that we just talked about. But barring something crazy happening, these 2 tackles are going to be first round talents. Miles Frazier might be a first round talent, right? He's trying to play himself into that first round, but definitely a day 2 guy at the very worst. And they're getting good play out of the center and out of the left guard as well. Just really impressed with what LSU has put together on the offensive line. Who's going to win this battle, though? Right? That's the big question. To me, I really like South Carolina's defensive front. I think that they can. I feel like if you have a strong defensive line, you can beat offensive linemen one-on-one, right? And it's not the fact that it's not the case that South Carolina's defensive line has a couple of good guys, like really good guys. They've got 4 really good guys and really some depth behind them that you can put in and not feel like there's a ton of drop off. And that's going to be the issue for this LSU offensive line. And, every other team that they face this year, they're going to have dudes on the defensive line that they're lining up against, but not like South Carolina's about to bring. None are going to be as hot as South Carolina heading into this game. I like South Carolina in this matchup. What do you think, Mark?
Well, just to kind of put a cherry on top of what you just said, South Carolina's defensive line group has got to be the most underrated position group in all of college football. It absolutely has to be, because I went back and looked at a bunch of the preseason, and nobody would have known that Dylan Stewart was going to pop like he did, right? I mean, you can't count on true freshmen to do that. But nobody had these guys really in the top 5 of any kind of defensive line ranking, at least in the places that I looked. So, it really caught everybody by storm. But yeah, I mean, they've got multiple. You've got guys that you thought were going to be starters on this defensive line now hitting the second and the third string and rotating in. So, and I mean, TJ Sanders is a guy that's not even listed here. 43 tackles, 4.5 sacks last year from the defensive tackle position. That was last year. Alex Huntley, 33 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks last year from the defensive tackle position. Yumi Ozulu, a guy that a lot of people at the defensive end position thought was going to be playing probably a whole lot more important role, but now he's more in a depth position. Gilbert Edmond, 23 tackles, a sack. I mean, these are all guys that could have a pretty good chance of starting other places. And then you bring in, like we have listed here, DeAndre Jules comes over from Pitt, and you just absolutely hit on him in the portal. Kyle Kennard, you hit on him from Georgia Tech. He had 54 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks last year. Kyle Kennard did for Georgia Tech, a defense that was, I mean, he didn't have any help. Let's just say that. He didn't have any help. But let's talk a little bit more about this LSU offensive line for a second. Couple of notes that I had noted here. No sacks allowed yet in 2024 by the LSU offensive line. Nobody has gotten Garrett Nussmeier on the ground yet. Now, I know what everybody's going to say to that. You know, they haven't played a South Carolina level defensive line, and that is 100% true. They've played USC and something called nickels. They played some pocket change, and so yeah, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. But on the other hand of that, this team is really good at pass pro. This offensive line is really good at pass pro. 113th in the nation in rush yards per game is this LSU offense. 88.5 yards per game. And everybody at this point probably knows, and if you don't, John Emery, longtime in LSU running back at this point, last year had blew out a knee, sat out, came back. I believe it was his right one last year. He comes back, plays a game or two, has a pretty good game or two, and blows his left knee out. And this was already a running back room that had kind of lost a couple of guys from last year. And so there's a lot of questions, not to mention Jaden Daniels was a large chunk of their rushing production last year. Nussmeier, while he is mobile in the pocket, he can move around when he feels he's really good at feeling the pressure around him and scooting around. But he's not going to go take off and get you. He's not going to rush for 75 yards in a game. It's not going to happen. That's not the kind of guy this guy is. And so that kind of leads me to one of my questions, Mason, for this LSU offensive line, and it's not a popular take. So I totally 100% understand that. And if LSU fans see this, I actually have commented with some LSU fans that agree with me on this. I don't think this offensive line is as nearly as good as it's advertised. I know that Emory Jones is really good, and I know Will Campbell's really good, but I wonder. I just wonder because look, when you play with a generational guy or a Heisman candidate, you're going to look a whole lot better. There's no secret to that. I mean, national championship teams typically have more NFL, draft picks than, your 8-4 team. It's because they're around other really good players. They all make each other look really good. Jaden Daniels was able to escape the pocket and get away from defenders pretty much at will. He was a thin built fella, but boy, he was quick and he was fast too. So I'm still trying to figure out how this offensive line has transitioned from that to a purely pocket passer in Garrett Nussmeier, which I have a ton of respect for, by the way, guys. If you don't remember, this is the same quarterback that threw all over Georgia in the second half of an SEC championship game, and I believe that team went on to win a national championship. So he's got skills. He can absolutely spin it. But can this LSU offensive line protect him from these beasts that South Carolina, you called them Scarolina, Mason, and a lot of people like that. I don't know if you saw that, but lots of people liked you calling them Scarolina, and it kind of did stick with me as well. Maybe we can do a little spooky Scarolina episode there in Halloween. That's what it made me think of.
When we get to Cocktober, Carolina is your team. I mean,
oh yeah. That's got a nice little ring to it there. I like that. But my point remains with this offensive line for LSU. Can they get a push and run the football? Because if they can't, it's probably going to be a little bit of a long day, my friend. It's supposed to be raining, by the way. I don't know if everybody's checked the weather or not, but there's like 70 to 80% chance of rain for this game in South Carolina. And I'm not saying that this overwhelmingly helps South Carolina. It's going to rain for both teams here. South Carolina hasn't been amazing at running the football or anything this year, so I don't think they have like a unbelievably clear advantage on offense versus LSU, who obviously likes to throw it a lot more, and their running back room being a little bit thin. But that's also kind of a storyline here for this game. You got anything else on that before we move to the next kind of little matchup we have here?
no, I think we're good. We can move on. I think we're on the same page with that. I do like it's kind of puzzling how bad LSU's been at running the football. Even though I know they're down to 2 running backs, like I get it, but they're not 2 like terrible running backs. So
Yeah.
the fact that the offensive line's not getting a push up front, that really speaks to the interior of the offensive line, which we know is a little bit behind the 2 tackles that we mentioned are going in the first round. But yeah, overall, I mean, if they're not able to run the football in this game and become one dimensional, I have questions about Nussmeier's protection in this game against that defensive line.
Well, that is a perfect segue into our next topic, Mason, which is this LSU passing game versus the South Carolina secondary. And the reason it's a perfect segue is, Mason, because if LSU is one dimensional and South Carolina knows that they're going to throw it, or I guess better yet, knows that LSU can't run it on this front, it's going to be big, big problems because this is a good secondary for South Carolina. Also, very, very underrated. Now, are they crazy deep? I don't know. I don't know about that part, but is the starting lineup looks to be healthy and they look really good. So I like this group. Now, Chris Hilton, who's pictured for LSU here, is still day to day. Brian Kelly has said that he's told us a couple of weeks ago that it was a bone bruise. It's in his foot, and it was day to day. He thought maybe he'd come back last weekend. He didn't come back last weekend. He's still not practicing at full speed. And Brian Kelly also said that he feels as though the injury may be one. It's going to come down to Chris Hilton and how much pain he can play with, basically, um, which doesn't sound very good. That doesn't sound good to me. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't pass catchers out here for LSU still. Kyron Lacey is going to be a big issue, and I've seen these types of receivers come through the SEC time and time again, Mason, over the last few years. Alabama's had some. LSU's had quite a few now. When a guy like Kyron Lacey is on his game, he can just single-handedly bust the game wide open. T-Mac at Arizona is kind of the same way, a guy that we're going to talk about later in the show, wide receiver at Arizona. When he's on his game like he was in week one, he'll just take the game right on over. And that's the type of guy that Kyron Lacey is. And you've got to watch out for it because once he's on a roll, it's really hard to get him slowed down. But I like this secondary for South Carolina. Nick Emanwari, he makes his way back. 71 tackles last year, 2 interceptions, 8 pass deflections. He's at one of the safety spots, and then DQ Smith, 73 tackles, had a couple of tackles for loss and 2 pass deflections last year. He is back as well. And then I really like O'Donnell Fortune, 39 tackles, 6 pass deflections, and a couple of picks last year himself. The other cornerback spot, you got a couple of guys still kind of battling it out, but both of them have looked pretty good for the most part so far. And then I think one of the most impressive guys in the secondary, Jalen Kilgore, playing that nickelback position, 76 tackles, 6 pass deflections, forced fumble, an interception last year. And Mason, he's already surpassed some of those numbers. He's already got 2 pass deflections and 2 interceptions in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy has started off really, really, really hot for South Carolina. Where, like I said, I don't know how deep this team is. If you have one of those safeties go down, I'm sure there's somebody there to step up. I'm not sure they're going to be quite at the level of, Emanwari or DQ Smith, obviously, right? But I really, really like the starting group, and they're healthy right now. If South Carolina can figure out a way, as you said, to make LSU one dimensional and know that they have to throw it, and you know what that means, guys? That means being successful on defense on first and second down. You've got to get LSU in third and long, third and obvious. And if South Carolina can do that, they may come away with an interception or two, which is something that they really need to do because this offense is something we haven't really talked about yet. It's not great. What do you think about this matchup here?
Well, I feel like the jury is still out on the South Carolina secondary. And the reason is because I don't think that they've been tested. We saw in the game against Kentucky, Kentucky does not have a pulse on offense when it comes to passing the football, especially. Um, maybe just in general, maybe period. Because they looked absolutely flabbergasted when with this defensive front for South Carolina, and I think that's where South Carolina wins in the passing game. Is with their blitz packages and things like that. They're going to have to install some blitz packages. Maybe you see Kilgore coming off the edge at playing that nickel position and doing some nickel back blitzing and things like that, because if LSU's pass pro kind of holds up on that defensive line and they're not getting pressure on Nussmeier, I think that Nussmeier will take advantage of that and kind of pick them apart. Now, it's fair to point out if Chris Hilton doesn't go, that's I feel like LSU kind of doesn't have the dudes behind Lacey. I mean, there's really nobody that scares you. CJ Daniels, I think we're still kind of waiting on him to come on. He's a grad transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Xavier Thomas, Aaron Anderson. I do really like Mason Taylor, but is Kilgore going to match up on Mason Taylor throughout the game? That's an interesting matchup that we'll have to watch as well. But to me, if you're giving Nussmeier time, I think that he can pick apart this defensive backfield, which I do really like. I really like this backfield for South Carolina. But I just worry that a lot of their success has been dependent upon the defensive line for South Carolina, and isn't really a byproduct of them being elite. I think that, and this is fair for any team that you want to talk about. If the defensive line isn't getting pressure up front, then it's going to expose a secondary. I'm afraid that might happen in this game, but I do like the projection of this defensive backfield. I just feel like, for me, they're a little bit unproven. I'm not ready to say that they're elite yet as an entire unit, because they haven't been tested with the pass rush that the South Carolina defensive front has been able to get so far. But with LSU, I think that they're thin in the passing game. It's Kyron Lacey, and then maybe a decoy of Chris Hilton. I know we're not
Mason
getting 100.
Taylor.
Yeah, I mean Mason Taylor, but I know we're not getting Chris Hilton at 100%. If we were, he would have played last week. So that kind of hampers my feeling about this. But yeah, ultimately I don't mean to ride the fence here, but I feel like there's no real lean on either side of the football when you look at these two position groups. The South Carolina secondary, like I said, is unproven, and then LSU is just depleted, I feel like, in comparison to where they've been in years past. No real dominant playmakers outside of Lacey and Taylor and Chris Hilton, who even at 100% hasn't played like a dominant wide receiver. So I think it's fair to question whether or not he's even going to be one of the elite receivers in the SEC.
Yeah. An interesting part of this is that LSU running back shortage that they've got going on. There's a shortage of bodies in that running back room, and I think whenever you play South Carolina, you're going to have a veteran running back that is ready to pick up the blitz in the backfield. I think that's going to be something that's really important whenever you play South Carolina. And LSU, I don't think they have that experience. I'm interested to see, how they kind of manage that, because I don't obviously LSU. This is the best offensive line that South Carolina has faced, and I hate to keep going back to the last topic we just talked about, but everything just ties into the trenches. But this is the best offensive line that South Carolina has faced, hands down. And while that is true, and LSU has not given up a sack this year, I think that ends this weekend. There's no way that South Carolina gets skunked in the sack numbers this weekend. Now, is it 2 or 4? That's the question for me. Is it 2 or is it 4?
I think the number's 2.5. If you're giving me an over and under, and if South Carolina wants to win this game, it's got to be over. I don't feel I feel like if they win this game, they're at 4. You know what I mean? If they get held to 1 or 2, I think that they lost this football game. That's kind of like a what some would call a padlock stat in our industry.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this all works out. And another thing before we get on to this next topic, with the shortage of wide receivers as well, Chris Hilton out, you kind of lack some experience. Obviously, you lost 2 guys to the NFL last year, so you're not returning a bunch of experience in this room. You're not going to see any like 4 wide receiver sets or anything from LSU. I don't think you're going to see the tight end come off the field a whole lot. Mason Taylor's going to play a lot of snaps this game. I think that if you're doing some kind of fantasy thing, Mason Taylor, he's going to be one of the go-to guys in this game. He has to be, because I don't think Chris Hilton's going to play, man. I just a bone bruise in his foot. I just I don't know. I
And
don't
then
know.
you want to have him out there in potentially a wet game. I'm with you.
I just don't see that. I don't see that. I don't think it's smart. I don't think it's putting your best players on the field. But at the same time, LSU, I feel like it's just another way that LSU is limited offensively in this game. Now they're limited formationally. They're limited fun like uh, how am I? What am I trying to say? They're limited on running the football. They obviously can't do that. There's just so much I feel like working against this team here in this game. Not to mention it's on the road. This is something we hadn't talked about yet. Let's talk about the South Carolina offense, okay? And then we're going to talk about the LSU defense a little bit. Not one of the better offensive units in the country, and not one of the better defensive units in the country. So it's kind of crazy. This game is strength on strength, kind of weakness on weakness, if you will. Um, I'd hate to say weakness. Let's just say work in progress, right? This South Carolina offense is a work in progress right now. Where is Nick Harbor? Um, if somebody hadn't put him on the back of a milk carton, now look, I know he's played. I kid. He's got like 34 snaps, which is good for like the 5th most snaps for a wide receiver on this team. But he hasn't even got the ball in his hand yet, Mason. I mean, he's what's going on? You got to get playmakers the ball. Maybe they've been holding out for this one, but Nick Harbor is kind of just that snake line in the grass, and as soon as somebody can get that guy riled up and get him going, I feel like it's going to be a really, really big deal for the South Carolina offense. Lenora Sellers still trying to cut his teeth. This hasn't been a clinic in the passing game, nor the running game. Rocket Sanders has had some moments. He's a nice addition to this offense, and an offensive line that returns 4 out of 5 starters. Now, when you return 4 out of 5 starters from a unit that wasn't that great last year, you kind of have some questions. But nevertheless, they have experience. Um, but we got to figure out some kind of identity for this offense, because the defense has just set it up for this offense over and over and over again on a tee, um, these first couple of games. And at some point, this offense is going to have to, wake up from the offseason and get it going. Lenore Sellers, I felt like looked a little better in week 2 than he did week 1. So I'm going to take that as, you know, things are moving in the right direction, but we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. What do you think about the South Carolina offense?
Well, I'm someone who's kind of holding on to hope for Lenore Sellers. You'll hear some people talk about how this isn't the guy, he's not a quarterback, and blah blah blah. I like his skill pieces. I think he's
Okay,
a
you're
fun.
quoting me from the overreaction show, and that's not fair, because I would just drank 10 beers, and that was, it's the overreaction show, Mason. You can't hold it
Yeah.
against me. What happens on Saturday night stays on Saturday night.
Well, I was gonna keep you incognito and just roll with some guys. Some guys that come on this show. No, so but I'm holding on hope that he is going to get better. He's a work in progress. Nobody really expected him to come out and just light the world on fire. And in this year, he's always been a project, right? He wasn't some polished quarterback coming into South Carolina. So you had to expect that there would be some drop off, with Spencer Rattler going to the NFL, and there has been, and that's okay. As long as he continues to progress throughout the year, I'd like to see him in this game just kind of complete 60% of his passes. I think that's kind of the goal here in this game. You got to get Rocket Sanders involved. He doesn't seem like much of a rocket right now when you really watch him run. Doesn't have a ton of burst. I'm curious what the run game looks like, especially if it's going to be raining in this game, which my weather report's saying that it's going to be just cloudy right now. So we'll see. Keep an eye on the weather, especially if you're betting on this game. This is one that you definitely want to keep an eye on. But can you get Rocket Sanders involved? To me, that's going to be the catalyst for this football team in this game. Get him involved. Get him at least 80 yards on the ground. That's kind of the point here, where you got to be over 80 yards in this game, in my opinion, because I don't think that Lenore Sellers is going to come out here and throw for 300 yards against LSU. I just don't see it.
This offense hasn't even gotten 300 yards total in either one of the first two games they played. They're averaging about 265 yards a game right now.
If you didn't do it against Old Dominion, I don't know that you're going to do it against LSU, and what seems to be a pretty improved defense for LSU with Blake Baker coming over. I've got questions about that. Against Kentucky, though, if you watch that game, Kentucky was getting some pressure. I mean, this was a battle of defensive lines for most of that game, and Lenore Sellers, credit him, he came over the top and made some good plays. We saw Robbie Ashford come in. He made some good plays, really made some good plays with his legs, ran hard. I'm kind of wondering if you don't see a little bit of Robbie Ashford in this game just because of how well he played, especially if Sellers struggles once again and the game's close enough where putting in an experienced quarterback like Robbie Ashford might give South Carolina a little bit of an edge. But when I look at the receivers, I'm with you. Where the heck is Nick Harbor? Get this guy a freaking end around. Get him a jet sweep or something. If he's not getting open,
Seriously.
if it's his route running deficiencies, let's just hand the ball off to him. The guy's got Olympic track speed. Like I don't understand that aspect of or I guess I don't understand the offensive scheme and why he's not being utilized at all. I mean, I understand he's a raw talent, but even raw talents can find the football every once in a while, and he hasn't yet, which is really head scratching. It's really puzzling. Now, in his defense, the South Carolina offense hasn't been on the field a ton either. They haven't extended drives very well, and so they really haven't had a lot of offensive plays in general. So maybe if they can get extra drives and whatnot, then maybe they get him a little bit more involved. But really, the bright spot in this offense has been the true freshman, Mazio Bennett, number 3, 5 receptions, 81 yards, averaging 16.2, and he's got 1 touchdown. Outside of that, kind of just a bunch of guys, for the most part. Jared Brown's done some nice things, but statistically, this unit's just got to play better. I mean, if they're going to win this ball game, you don't have to go out and outplay LSU's receivers and pass game. Like that's not the objective, because you trust your defense to be able to get those stops and give you the ball back, but extend drives, settle for 3 when you have to, but extend drives, get in the red zone on more drives than you don't, and that. And South Carolina so far hasn't been able to do that. I've got serious questions about this offense. I think if South Carolina loses this game, it's going to be because of their offense. And I think that this is going to hamper this team as a whole, potentially for the entire season, if they don't get better really in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And defenses keep you in games, right? So I suspect that South Carolina is going to be able to hang in some football games, and I think that's what's going to be able to keep them in this game here as well. And let's just kind of talk about, we got to do our due diligence, and You said a few minutes ago, you said the Old Dominion defense isn't as good as the LSU defense, and you are 100% correct. But it was kinda close last year. Let
Yeah, yeah,
if you look
that's fair.
statistically, Old Dominion, while did not play nearly as high a level of competition, obviously, okay, I can see that notion, but, um, Old Dominion, a lot of teams, about 120 different teams had better defensive statistics than LSU did, and that's why Blake Baker was brought in to LSU from Missouri, um, and I think it's too much to ask this early in the season for Blake Baker to have this defense all figured out at this point. It's too early. And in my opinion, defense takes a lot longer to build up after, especially when you're building from literally the bottom floor, right, of college football. Statistically speaking, I don't think talent wise, I know not talent wise. LSU's always got talented guys, but um, for whatever reason, this team hasn't played defense worth a lick, couldn't stop a nosebleed the last couple of years. And unfortunately for LSU, but fortunately for South Carolina's offense, that has continued for the most part. Um, I have seen instances where I've watched LSU's defense this year and I've thought, hey, Blake Baker actually had some guys in position right there. But when you really look at the roster as a whole, it's pretty much all the same guys. Minus a couple of dudes on the defensive line, which is that is the biggest deficiency, guys, for this LSU defense is that defensive line and the secondary. The linebacker room is pretty decent. There's some really, really nice pieces, but decent overall in the linebacker room. Defensive line, thin, not very talented. Just had an injury. I can't remember the guy's name. Just had another injury this week. You're down another guy, right? A guy that was playing. So that defensive line is down real bad. And then the secondary, it's all the same players from last year, pretty much. Um, so I just feel like it's a lot to ask, I guess, of Blake Baker, but I still had to do it. I had to pull up the numbers so far this year, the LSU defense versus the defense of last year in 2023, and I've compiled those stats, put them on your screen there. 4 points per game less so far in 2024, and guys, we have a small sample size, so I'm, you know, it's kind of you could argue it's kind of a butthole move for me to pull up stats from 2 games, but you know what? We this is what we do in college football. We look at everything under a microscope, and LSU's a big boy football program. So I had to check it out. Opponent red zone conversion, you're seeing a little bit of a better trend there, about 4% better there. Rushing yards per game allowed, pretty considerable difference there, about 50 yards a game rushing. That is noticeable. That is a big difference there because you're talking, you know, 5 first downs worth of run plays there. That's a big difference. 50 yards in a game is different. So the havoc plays is kind of one thing that surprised me though, Mason. Um, this team is not, and maybe they're not blitzing at all. Maybe this LSU defense is saying, no, we're going to keep our structural integrity and we're not going to bring the house and we're going to play real defense and we're going to just have men where they're supposed to be men. But the havoc plays last year were happening at a much higher rate than what they are right now. So I'm not sure that this is a game where LSU decides all of a sudden that they're going to start sending the house because they need the help. They need as much help as they can in the back end. But, you know, does LSU respect South Carolina wide receivers? We'll see. Can Nick Harbor blow past them? If somebody can blow past this defense one good time, it'll set everything else up for South Carolina the rest of this game. But this is not a great LSU defense, is my whole point of this. Last year, we joked about it several times. We said the best medicine for a struggling or bad offense right now is to play LSU's defense. Because every time somebody played LSU's defense last year, they had an absolute ball and field day. Which is why they had the number 1 offense in the country in damn near every category, but lost 5 football games, 4 football games, whatever it was. Not a complimentary football team. Very one-sided. And that continues to be the truth. and that is what it is. What are your thoughts on this LSU defense? I think they're in better position, but it's the same dudes. It's going to take some time, I think. I I'm not ready to say that this is a good defense while it may be trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree, and we're asking some of the same questions we asked last year. You know, so far, it does, while it does seem like Harold Perkins is playing better, he doesn't look like what he did his freshman year. Still, I think that we're still trying to figure out what he is. What position is he going to play? I thought we would have answers at this point in the season. Still feel like we don't. For the most part. One bright light has been Syvion Jones. He's got 7 total tackles, 2 sacks already, a forced fumble, and a pass deflection. Been a little bit disruptive up front at the defensive end position. I think Gio Paez coming over from Wisconsin has been pretty good. 6 total tackles, 1 tackle for a loss. But overall, we're asking some of the same questions on the defensive line, or on the defense as a whole. It starts up front on the defensive line. I think you just have a very average defensive line, not even an SEC average, like a college football average SEC or defensive line. And but in the linebacker room, I do still like Harold Perkins as a player. I think he's really good. I don't know that he's necessarily playing at a first round talent type of level.
Yeah.
But I know he's capable of that. I mean, look, this is a guy who can take a ball game over. We've seen it several times, and this could be a game where he just does that. But also, Whit Weeks, the true sophomore, has been playing really well. 11 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for a loss. We heard in the offseason that he had been coming on, and I think he has so far. What does he do to affect the run game for South Carolina? That's kind of a big question to me. He could be sort of one of those playmakers in the middle of this defense as well. And then in the secondary, you got true sophomore Ashton Samps, who's got 8 tackles, already got 3 pass deflections, which is really good this early in the season after just 2 games. Seems like he's playing himself into a lockdown sort of cornerback, and we know what Sage Ryan brings to the table. I think that with his experience, this is his 4th year now playing the cornerback position. With that experience, a lot of teams seem to be going away from him and challenging Ashton Stamps. Well, Ashton Stamps is answering the challenge. So you got 2 pretty good pieces in the cornerback positions. Major Burns playing that star. He's been really good throughout his career. I'm just a little bit curious about the safeties, and in particular, what they've been able to do in the run game. I need to see them coming up and playing the run a little bit better. I think that's been lacking for the LSU defense for years. When you don't have the defensive line up front that LSU historically has had, but here recently they haven't played all that great. They haven't played the run all that great. But when you don't have that, the other pieces of the defense have to work that much harder to stop the run, specifically that strong safety position. Got to come up and play the run a little bit better. They haven't done so this far in the season, and maybe it is that Blake Baker defense, and maybe they're kind of playing not prevent all the time, but kind of just playing back and making sure they don't get beat over the middle, keeping everything in front. But that's allowing some running plays to be made on this LSU defense, and I got to see a little bit more of a balanced defense from this unit to think that they are going to be disruptive and be a strong suit for this team. As of right now, it's definitely the weakest part of the team still, but they are a touch better from where they were last year. Can they build on that against South Carolina offense that so far has been pretty anemic? That's kind of the big question to me. A lot of interesting unit matchups in this game. A lot of good on good, bad on bad type of play. We're going to learn a lot from both of these teams in this game this weekend. I absolutely cannot wait for it. College game day is going to be there. First time in Columbia since like 2018 or something. I really wish it was a night game. I hate that this is a noon kickoff. I think had this been scheduled, last Saturday or Sunday, maybe it would have been a later kickoff. But nonetheless, really excited for it. We got LSU at -7. for my money right now, I think LSU is going to cover that 7 points. You
Oh,
can get it at 6.5 in some places. I would definitely take the 6.5 there, but you know, with the way that this offense is playing for LSU, I just feel like they're going to be able to get the protection up front. Not for the entirety of the game, but enough protection up front to give Garrett Nussmeier the time to make those plays down the field. I think that the LSU run game takes a step forward in this one. I think you could see some South Carolina defensive linemen over pursuing a little bit, getting a little bit too hungry, trying to go for the sack, and maybe one of these running backs kind of gets loose a couple of times. It'll be a close game for 4 quarters, but I think that LSU kind of wins it and seals it late in the fourth quarter and wins by a touchdown.
wow. Gotcha. I'm gonna have to fight you on that one. I'm taking South Carolina. Give me the +7. I'm not so sure that this is gonna be one that's gonna be on the best bet show for me, just because of the fact that
Right.
there's a lot of questions got to be answered for both of these teams. But one pick that probably will be on the best bet show, depending on what the number does as the week goes on, is this over under. And I'm going to hit the under here because I think both of these offenses, I know South Carolina's offense is not very good at right now. They're still trying to figure out where they're at. But I think LSU's offense struggles here. And when, I think they get too one dimensional in this football game. I don't think they're going to be able to run the football against South Carolina, especially with the woes they've had in the running back room. And I don't think LSU's personally offensive line is as good as what everybody thinks it is. And that's just me. I get why people would argue with me on that, but that's just the way I feel. And I gotta see it this weekend, and maybe LSU will make a believer out of me. But I'm gonna have to see it before I'll believe it. Give me South Carolina +7. I like the momentum that this team has. There's been South Carolina fans in the comment section saying, "You jinxed us," blah blah blah. Guys, hey, I know we've all got battered fan syndrome at some point, okay? But nothing I say here is going to affect the outcome of this football game. South Carolina's got a good defense, and it's about to show up on Saturday, I do believe.